look at life in New England, one of the things that has to be addressed is the Puritan church. And what was their service like? So let's take a quick look at Puritan church services. Now, Puritans, as I just said, are going to be located in New England. Now, some things that are very characteristic of the New England church is going to be that they're going to be held within town meeting houses. The services, so the church service itself, it's not necessarily going to be in a church as we would perceive a church to be, but they're going to be in a centrally located meeting house. Now, the Puritans were so dedicated, for lack of a better word, to the church services that they would actually go through town and they would search homes to make sure that everybody was able to attend the church service. And the meeting house, the community meeting house, it is going to be the most important building in the entire community. Services are going to last up to 5 hours. And the thing is, for Puritans, their services, yes, you went to church in the morning, then you get a break for the midday meal. So you could go to someone's home and they would actually have a meal ready to go. And they would have the fire going so you could warm yourself by the fire. And then you're going to go back to church in the evening. And it's what the whole day is going to be dedicated to. It's going to be dedicated to becoming closer to God, learning more about God, and just being one as a community in your worship of God. So the church services are really going to bind the community together. But eventually it's going to get to a point where it becomes more ceremonial, and there's this fear of losing your faith and not trusting God enough. So what we see is a revival that's going to happen, and it's called the Great Awakening. Now, the Great Awakening is going to take place in the 1730s. And as I stated before, it's going to be spurred by this feeling of people losing their faith. So preachers are going to travel all over, and they're going to go from town to town to town. And they're going to hold these outdoor revival meetings. And if you think about the word revival, they're trying to revive or to bring back to life the faith that people had previously in God. Now, it's going to have a very powerful effect on the colonies for a few reasons. So let's take a look. When we look at the effects that the Great Awakening had on the average colonists, it's going to do a couple things, and not all of them are going to be religious. The biggest thing is that it's going to show people that everybody's equal in the eyes of God. Now, that may not seem like such a big deal. However, there is one person who did not view themselves as being equal with everybody else in the eyes of God. Really, there were probably a lot of people who didn't view themselves that way. But the king is not going to see himself as an equal to everyone else. God has ordained that that person be king. So therefore, he has some special favor in God's eyes. So what the Great Awakening is going to do is it's going to tell people, look, that is not true. Everybody is equal. There's no one greater or lesser in the eyes of God. Everybody's going to be exactly the same. So the king is no better than you are. So that is going to give a lot of power to the colonists. And all of a sudden they're going to realize that they don't necessarily need a king. The second thing that it's going to do is it's going to allow ordinary people to understand God's will. As long as they have an open heart and an open ear, they can hear what God wants them to do or to be. So, now, this is an important concept because if you think back to, this is an important concept because if you think back to like the Middle Ages and who controlled all of society, it would have been in the church. Because who did God talk to? God talked to priests. God talked to the king. God did not talk to common, everyday, ordinary people. And what the Great Awakening is going to say is that everybody's equal, and everybody can find out what the will of God is for their life. They don't have to wait on someone to tell them, this is how God wants you to live. This is what God wants you to do. Because as long as you have an open heart and an open ear, you can be willing to listen to what God has to say to you. God doesn't have to talk through somebody else to get to you. He can talk directly to your heart. So, by encouraging these different ideas, we are going to see the Great Awakening help pave the way for the American Revolution. Because if they're equal to the king and they don't need a king, and God can talk to everyday people, he doesn't just talk to the king and we have to do the will of the king because by doing the will of the king is doing the will of God. All of a sudden, we are equal in God's eyes with the king. And we can manage, we can rule ourselves. So it's really going to pave the way for the American Revolution.